Hello, and welcome to episode 96 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Evan Glass, Executive Director of Ghandi Brigade Youth Media and a civic activist in Montgomery County, Maryland. Evan, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Jordan. How are you?
Excellent. The first question we'd like to pose to you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
That is a great question, and I think most of what I've done throughout my life has been to promote public interest. And the first thing I did professionally was, after graduating from American University with degrees in broadcast journalism and political science, I ended up working at CNN and was there for 12 years, where I viewed it as my role to provide information to the public and to help them in the decision-making process, and also hold elected officials accountable to their actions. And so journalism was really my first love and my opening into the public discourse.
Now, were you successful at holding politicians accountable in that role?
I would like to think so. I covered a few politicians who I had to chase throughout the Capitol subway system.
Please.
Whose homes I sat outside of on long, hot weekends.
That's dedication.
Absolutely. And at the time, it was overtime as well.
Uh-huh.
And I do think that I helped keep elected officials on the straight and narrow, or at least expose some information that made them actually resign Congress. Not me myself, but it was the fourth estate, if you will, that really fostered those moves.
Could you elaborate on the subway story?
Sure. Congressmen and women, when they don't really want to talk to the media, they have plenty of places to hide out.
Uh-huh.
And this one individual, former Congressman Cunningham from San Diego, basically ran to the subway and hopped on it and evaded us, because the subway quickly departed to go to the Capitol.
And this is the private subway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And journalists are allowed on it as well, but you don't normally hop on with a member of Congress if clearly they don't want you hopping on with them. So he ran away from us, sped away from us. And then, there were other times. One, I mentioned sitting outside a Congress member's house, and there have been numerous instances where I have used the journalistic endeavor to talk to elected officials.
Interesting. So you proceeded for 12 years through CNN. Do you have any other fun stories about? I'm sure you have plenty.
One of my favorite stories from when I was with CNN was right after Sarah Palin was selected to be John McCain's running mate in 2008. She went back to Alaska to recharge her batteries for the weekend. Her first campaign stop was in Reno, Nevada. And I met her. A few of us met her at the airport on the tarmac, did a little campaign event, and then we hopped back on her plane, a very small plane, and then flew to Denver, Colorado, where she was going to do an event the next day.
Wow.
And on that flight, again, a very small flight, that was on Saturday night in September, the first weekend in September, and it happened to be the debut of Saturday Night Live, and the very first time that Tina Fey did her impersonation of Sarah Palin. And there were probably 24 journalists on the plane, and we were cackling because that was a spot-on impression. Behind us were staff and the Secret Service.
They were less than amused.
There was silence. But right in front of us was, the felt curtain on 3 rows of Sarah Palin and her top staff. And when a flight attendant came out from that area, someone grabbed him and said, "What are they doing? Are they watching it? Is there any reaction?" And he said they're watching it, but he didn't divulge any more information. And it was just surreal to be with her on her plane at that moment, Yeah.
Now, you ran for delegate as a Democrat, correct?
I ran for county council.
I ran for county council. And in running for county council as a Democrat, you espoused some, would you describe them as liberal policy positions?
Very much so.
Okay. So over the course of your career as a journalist, I'm sure it was your responsibility to ensure that nobody knew what your political persuasion was. As a Democrat in spirit and belief, how was it to interact with Sarah Palin and her staff, a Republican running for Congress, who probably you disagreed with on many different issues, yet, how did you grapple with presenting them in a fair light? And how did you handle, I guess, suppressing your own beliefs?
That's a really good question. And I have covered a lot of stories where the principal was espousing beliefs that either I did not support or, in some cases, quite frankly, were less than nice to people of my persuasion as a member of the LGBTQ community. And I remember in 2003, 2004, covering Congress when President George W. Bush and the Republicans were pushing a federal marriage amendment, denying members of the LGBTQ community the right to marry.
Is this the Defense of Marriage Act?
That was the Defense of Marriage Act. And I had to interview senators and other public policy leaders and advocates on both sides of the aisle, and it was a little disturbing, but my job was to ask them the questions, and then I got up and left. There wasn't a whole lot of small talk or anything else, or friendship or bonding.
Did they ever suspect, do you think, that you didn't agree with them?
It didn't come up. It didn't matter. They could have thought that I was gay, and quite frankly, I thought the same of some of them, neither here nor there. But I had a job to do. And in 2008, I happened to be in Newton, Iowa, in the run-up to the Iowa caucuses, and was with Mike Huckabee, who won those caucuses, and we were interviewing him after a Sunday morning evangelical church appearance, and he wanted to pray with my correspondent, myself, and my two cameramen. And he asked me if I was married, and I said no, but I'm in a relationship. And he said, well, I'm sure your girlfriend awfully misses you.
Yeah.
I didn't respond. It wasn't my place or the time to get into that conversation. And so the second part of your question is I found an outlet to share my opinions through community service. During the daytime, I would be covering Congress. And in the evenings, I came back to the downtown Silver Spring community and formed a neighborhood association and started joining some boards and realizing that the work I could do in the evening, pedestrian safety, working with small businesses, working on various issues, really filled my heart and made more purposeful the work I was doing, evening it out, where during the daytime I was an objective journalist, not being able to share my opinions. But at night, I was going back and doing pedestrian safety and building sidewalks and crosswalks, or at least advocating that they get done, which they were. And my bosses at work thought it was kind of cute that I'd leave work early at 7 o'clock at night to go to meetings. But the issues I worked on were nonpartisan issues. Who's going to argue that a sidewalk improvement or pedestrian crossing is Republican or Democrat?
Now, as a member of the traditional media, when you were an employee of CNN, you were prohibited from running as a partisan candidate for elected office. Is this correct?
It is. And I never thought of running for office when I was at CNN. My job was to be a journalist, and I really enjoyed the civic activities that I was engaged in the evening. I never got involved in partisan issues.
You got drawn in your own community. How do you differentiate the desire to improve your community through what you call nonpartisan issues like sidewalks and speed bumps, which, by the way, are the most controversial issues a community often will ever come across, and more partisan ideas. How is it that you evolve, or what's the difference in approaching public service through the nonpartisan ideas versus approaching public service through a partisan elected position?
So when I left CNN in the spring of 2011, and I went to work for a strategic communication firm that worked in the nonprofit sector, I was almost immediately approached by two Montgomery County legislators and asked if I wanted to join the board of Equality Maryland. And as a gay man who had worked at CNN, who could not espouse my belief that, yes, people should be able to marry whom they love, I absolutely jumped at the opportunity and I joined Equality Maryland, and it was the first time I got involved in what I would consider a real partisan political issue.
Would you describe that feeling as a sense of relief?
Absolutely. It was awesome to be able to embrace something that I had, an issue I had long held, and to be able to share it. And not only share it with friends and family, but share it with the world.
I'd like to talk for a moment about the topic of sacrifice and its relationship with public service. Now, you viewed yourself, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a public servant while working as a journalist for CNN. And there seems to have been an inherent sacrifice, which is evident in you being relieved to be able to express your full identity once you left that job. Can you speak about the role of sacrifice in public service, especially within the context of the first 12 years of your professional career?
Being a journalist, there's a lot that's sacrificed. First and foremost, you sacrifice your own opinions. There are individuals in the journalistic community who don't even vote.
Are you sacrificing your opinion or your right to publicly express your opinion?
A good distinction, and I would say the latter. The only people who knew what I thought were very close friends or family. And I would not go up to conversations with anyone at a bar or even on an airplane. And people engaged. In 2008, when I was on the campaign trail with John McCain, through natural conversation with people, they would say, "Oh, so you're a Republican?" I'm like, "No, I'm covering John McCain for CNN. Someone's got to do it. It doesn't mean I'm a Republican." It never went beyond that. But the sacrifice there, you can ask my husband, and he sacrificed, and our relationship sacrificed, because while being on the road so often as a journalist, I got lots of frequent flyer points and hotel frequent flyer miles and points and everything. There's a lot that's sacrificed. So my own personal opinions were certainly something that I gave up, or the expression of them, but that's why I was able to channel those passions into civic endeavors.
Would you say marriage equality was an issue that was originally advanced and supported by progressives and liberals, or conservatives and Republicans?
Explain the difference.
So what I'm trying to get at here is, in having your home situation, right? And eventually you have a husband now, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's a public spouse, right? And it's a legal definition. But it wasn't so long ago that was a partisan issue. And that really, to just have a home life, that is the expectation of many adults in the United States, was almost to be partisan. So was there an implication when you had to be nonpartisan in your job? How did that affect your romantic relationship, which you just referenced earlier with the frequent flyer miles and your partner?
So my husband, Jason, recognized the work that I was doing. I was a producer at CNN when we met, and he still loved me despite me not being able to be an activist. He himself doesn't have that type of streak.
Would it have hurt your ability or impeded your ability to be a reporter on a McCain or Palin airplane if they knew that you had a husband or a long-term boyfriend?
I don't know. So I was on the McCain campaign in 2008. I've covered the major campaigns that I covered were the Democratic takeover in 2006, the Tea Party revolution of 2010, and then I left in 2011. And I covered the 2004 and 2000 campaigns back from the Bureau.
Sure.
And times certainly have changed. I know a number of out gay journalists who cover politics, and I think we're beyond that.
So let's move beyond that right now in our conversation. You are now working as the executive director of the Ghandi Brigade Youth Media. Why? How? What led you to transition from being a journalist to this role, and how did you get here?
Ghandi Brigade Youth Media is a nonprofit that operates throughout the county providing free after-school programming for middle school and high school kids. The two things that we focus on are media training. We teach them videography, graphic design, digital editing, real work-life skills. And then we also engage them in topical conversations about their community, about their schools, about national politics, especially with President Trump coming in.
So civic engagement is an important part of after-school curriculum with you guys.
Absolutely. Okay. And then we combine those two, and they create documentaries and public service announcements and graphic design campaigns on the issues they care about.
That seems to tie into your producer background.
Absolutely. And my civic engagement and my media production fit nicely with this role. And it was by happenstance and by sad history that I found myself here, because the founding executive director of Ghandi Brigade Youth Media, a dear friend of mine named Richard Jaggi, he founded the organization about 12 years ago, and he passed away very sadly in May of 2014, very suddenly. And over the summer, the board was looking to hire a new executive director, or at least an interim executive director, and they asked me if I was interested, and 2.5, 3 years later, here I am.
And what had happened in June 2014, just so our listeners know?
Just so everybody knows what Jordan is alluding to, I ran for Montgomery County Council, and I lost. So I was looking for something to do in the next chapter of my life.
So June 24th, 2014 was the day of the Democratic primary election. The founder, or the previous executive director of the Ghandi Brigade Youth Media had unfortunately passed away the preceding month. And later that summer, you were no longer a candidate and became available. And you originally had left CNN to run for office. Is that the timeline?
Most of that is correct. I was a communications consultant, doing marketing and public relations for nonprofits and government organizations in between CNN and my run for county council.
So why does this appeal to you? Why does it matter to have kids educated in civic matters? Why does it matter to have an after-school activity? Why is this something that matters to you?
Working with young people is awesome. They are so cool. They teach me a lot, especially on our smartphones. I download a bunch of apps because they tell me to. But they're engaged and they want to be heard. And what our organization does is provide them with the skills and the knowledge to be a full participant at the table. And so we take them to council hearings, we take them to forums, and they are usually the youngest people in the room, but when they speak, everyone listens to them. Most of the kids in our program countywide are first-generation American, immigrant, or undocumented. And so especially now, with President Trump coming to office, they're scared.
Right.
And they don't know what to do. And
because they know people whose immigration status may be threatened by the incoming administration. Is that what you mean by especially now?
For some of them, yes. And for some of them, there's job insecurity or healthcare insecurity. Absolutely.
Now, you say when these young students speak, especially at a council hearing, for example, they tend to be listened to. Why is that? Is it because there are too few young people and they represent an underrepresented demographic among those who testify before elected bodies? Or is there some other reason why their voices are listened to perhaps more than others who may be testifying?
I'll simply answer that by saying yes. that yes, they are rarely seen at these events. Mm-hmm. And so to answer that second part, anytime new people show up in the public square, they're listened to. Elected officials are always looking to bring more people into the fold, hear more people, more viewpoints, more perspectives.
Right.
And what we do is offer that to the youth, who for them it's a wonderful learning opportunity, learning how their local government works, learning that they can be an impassioned advocate for change. And the best part is seeing some of their ideas really being listened to, and quite possibly some of them even being the catalyst for change.
So have they ever reported back to you on how they feel once they've done this? Do they feel empowered? Have you seen any changes transpire within an individual once they've become involved with the Ghandi Brigade youth media?
Yes. Thankfully, when they get involved, they learn their skill sets. They learn what type of media they like to produce, what kind of technology they feel comfortable working on.
Does this lead to job creation?
Some of them do go into media. And what the organization also does is when we do special projects for other nonprofits and create videos for them, we hire the kids in our program. So it's workforce for them as well, and they get paid a stipend for doing the work.
So it's workforce development and economic development for Montgomery County simultaneously with promoting civic engagement. So it's kind of like a triple win.
You got it. Absolutely. and when they produce their documentaries and produce other videos, and we're invited to show them before boards, commissions, religious organizations, or political clubs, the kids come. The kids then speak about their topic, why they selected it, what they learned. And to see the self-esteem rise in those youth, it's really something.
So speaking about enthusiasm for civic engagement and looking towards the future, you had run for county council, and this is the fun part. There have just been a whole bunch of vacancies that have been created through a term limit referendum in Montgomery County. So there's going to be a number of the current county council members will no longer be county council members after the next election in 2018. Does that potentially have any influence in your life?
A lot of people have been very strongly encouraging me to run for county council, given the changes that you just outlined, and it's something I'm giving some strong consideration to.
Why?
I love our community, and it has been an honor and a pleasure to work with my neighbors to create the common good that we all want. And it started off with sidewalks, quite frankly, and building a better pedestrian safety infrastructure. And then people started asking me about help with the opening of coffee shops down the block, and then restaurateurs, and then the Purple Line. And then it expanded that I love working with our neighbors to help them live in a better place, and thereby making us all live in a better place.
So you clearly have subject matter expertise. You have long-term dedication. You've demonstrated your interest over a period of time, and you clearly have the enthusiasm and energy. One question that voters or listeners may have in their minds is, gosh, I've looked at past candidates and past elections, and there seemed to be so much of the same thing, so many permutations of blue. In fact, this is actually a national trend where increasingly you're finding, for a myriad of reasons, throughout the United States, in any particular legislative district, you often find that the primary becomes a more competitive election than the general because you see a shift towards one end of the political spectrum. A lot of times voters have difficulty differentiating one candidate from another, and they say, look, even if that guy doesn't win, and I understand you feel like you would be very good and competent and efficient in this job, you bring the energy and the knowledge and the wherewithal, but for most people, 1 million people living in Montgomery County, they may be forgiven if they were to ask themselves the question, well, what difference would it make? Yeah, he may do this a little or that a little different, but it's going to be a liberal advancing similar progressive issues. How would you respond to that? Why does it matter that Evan Glass should be a council member as opposed to another progressive liberal who feels similarly on many of the issues? Why? What do you bring in particular to the table for our community?
What I said in 2014 when I was a candidate was that I have been doing the work of a council member for a very long time, as civic association president for 2 different civic associations, as a board member of Montgomery Housing Partnership, the county's largest nonprofit developer of affordable housing, as a founding board member of Conservation Montgomery, as chair of the Silver Spring Citizens Advisory Board. Those are titles and roles, but it includes just a body of work and a history of me working on various issues with the community. And my neighbors know that they can call me and I'll help them. And more often than not, I'll help them in the positive way and get things done. And that was my message back in 2014, where in that race there were 2 other elected officials. And I was not an elected official, but people knew that I had a track record of success as an ordinary neighbor. And so I think people are looking outside the box, that there also seems to be a national trend of moving away from politics as usual and from the usual suspects. And so I don't know what will happen in 2018, but...
But you're not politics as usual.
I don't think I am.
Why?
Because I've been a journalist. I've been a civic leader. I'm now a nonprofit leader working with our youth.
It seems like you've built a very solid resume for running for office, that you really have gotten the experience. Isn't that what Americans... Well, I'm not sure if it's what they've come to expect, but wouldn't that be a more traditional route, which is make yourself qualified for office and then run, as opposed to, for instance, someone who is not qualified for office and then who runs?
I think people make decisions and determinations in various ways.
Yeah.
But my background, to your point, there's nothing in my background that would have led to a political run. They were things that I've had jobs and have done things that I truly enjoyed without getting into really the political process.
You kind of got accidentally into it through gradual involvement. This wasn't an intentional plan from many, many years ago. This was slowly accumulation of experience. Is that correct?
That's correct. And quite frankly, it was a matter of circumstance as well that the sitting member of the county council at the time essentially made it known that she was not going to be seeking re-election and creating an opening. And had that not happened, I likely would not have run for county council.
So we're approaching the end of the podcast, and I'd like to ask you just to reflect on a moment on what you hope your legacy of public service would be. If you were to fast forward many decades towards the end of your long life of public service, what will you have left behind?
My track record to date has been as an objective journalist for a major news organization. Then I did strategic communications for nonprofits and government agencies promoting their good work. Then I was a candidate for county council. Now I'm an executive director of a nonprofit. I would never have imagined that trajectory to my life where it currently is. So I'm not even going to guess as to the winding and crazy road that lies ahead. But everything that I've done has shown that public service is in my blood. And I love working with our community, making it as strong as it can be. And I will continue doing that.
And that has been Evan Glass, Executive Director of the Ghandi Brigade Youth Media and a civic activist in Montgomery County. Evan speaks about having up to date provided a lifetime of public service and his intention to continue in the role in advancing the public interest as best he can. And the reason he does this is he demonstrates compassion, but he gets great joy out of the fun, the activities of being there. When he was a journalist, he was able to be on the ground. He was there witnessing the story, being with the key players, and providing a public service of accountability to the elected officials. And then when he moved on from there, he gradually became involved in his own community, and he became very real to him and very personable. And those individuals in his community began to see him as a resource, and he found great joy in being able to be someone who could get things done to help his own community. And from there, naturally evolved his campaign for Montgomery County Council. And then he is now the executive director of an organization that melds many of his different interests. So for Evan, public service can be many different colors. It can take many different forms, but it's always driven by a spirit, perhaps, that Ghandi himself once embodied and personified, which was love for your fellow man. So, Evan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jordan.
And this has been Public Interest Podcast, episode 96, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. This has been Jordan Cooper, your host. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.